G'day guys, I'm back with the Outer Circle, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at the SUNLU PA-like, so Nylon-like, ultraviolet resin in the 1000 gram bottle. Not that it matters how big the bottle is, but gives you an idea how much resin you get for the price. This is of course in Australian dollars. So, what do I think of the product? Well, in short, I do recommend it. But I want to go a little deeper into it because I want to look at multiple different resins from multiple different manufacturers and find the applications that they work best in. So, first things first, what does a Nylon-like offer over a standard photo curing resin? Well, Nylon-like basically has some more tensile properties. It's probably the best way to describe it. What does this mean? It means if you make something out of it, it needs more force pulling it apart to snap it versus a regular or standard type of resin. So my goal here was to find what applications this sort of resin works best in because, well, to be honest, most resins will work in most machines. So first thing I decided to do was to put it into the Helot Mage Pro, which is a very, very fast printer. Now, could it take printing at the kind of speeds that machine is capable of? It could, but not without failures. Now, were those failures a result of the resin or the machine? Well, I had to go in and I had to do a couple of things in order to stop the issues I was having with build plate adhesion, with supports failing, with all sorts of little issues. So the best way for me to achieve this, it turned out, was to do two specific things. First, I had to change up the supports. Now with pre-supported STLs, that's not so easy. The second thing I had to do was I had to heat up the resin. Now many of these resins are designed to operate in the 20 odd degrees Celsius range. I think about 23 is the standard that is specified. What I found was that in this particular resin, it actually functioned quite well in the 30 odd degree spectrum. So I generally heated it to around 32 to up to 35 degrees during the printing operation, especially in the sort of crucial step between the initial build plate and supports and the first parts of the miniatures that are adhering to the supports. Now with that in mind, I started getting a lot of success. So I was able to determine by doing that there were a combination of errors, in part not having the resin hot enough and also the actual machine and settings itself. So with all of that in mind, we started producing some pretty consistently good parts. We did have the occasional bit of build plate slip, that is where the build plate comes back down, doesn't perfectly align, due to a bit of looseness in the supports, and that leaves a sort of streak or groove on a certain layer because the entire layer has shifted sideways. That did occur. Again, with heating up the resin, that actually went away. Same thing happened when I tried adding more supports. So I took a multifaceted approach to this entire process. Another thing that I did with this was I tried adding in some tenacious resin. So tenacious resin, for those who don't know, is a very rubbery type of resin. And I added about 10% to this Nylon-like, as well as trying out a bit of translucent colouring and dye. These are entirely cosmetic, the colourings and dyes, but I did turn it a bit of a green tint. The initial tenacious that I added was actually a clear tenacious. So it had this sort of very strong opaque tone to it. And that made parts which were incredibly resilient, stronger than just the Nylon-like on its own, in fact. And I found that that gave me the best overall resin performance. Now, one other thing, I could not take the Helot Mage Pro to its maximum speed with this resin. I just couldn't do it. I was experiencing some failures, even with heated up resin, even with more supports added. So that was the limit there. The limit is about 80-ish% of what the Helot Mage Pro was capable of. Now, that's still incredibly fast. In fact, it's faster than most printers on the market, but it is a limitation. And that's nothing against the resin because the resin was not designed with that machine in mind. So Here now are some of the miniatures that I printed out in it. Now, I've printed out a couple of different samples here, some in 8K on the Hellite Mage Pro. I also used the Hellite 1 Plus. I didn't do my Elegoo different legions simultaneously, so I've done some Blood Angel stuff, some Alpha Legion stuff, and this gives you a bit of a wide spectrum of miniatures and results to look at, and you can kind of gauge for yourself how it performed. Now, what's crazy is all of the Alpha Legion Dark Angels, all that stuff was printed at a 0.05mm layer height. That's actually quite large. That is not what most people would print in. That is not considered to be a fine detail print. A fine detail print is a 0.03 to 0.01mm layer height. So 1/100th to 3/100ths of a millimeter. For those of you who work in Imperial, 40,000ths of an inch is 1 millimeter. So millimeters are quite small for those of you who live in the United States. I found, however, that this resin did hold up. Now, this is all good news because nothing was wrong with this material itself. And that's pretty rare. In the early days of resins, it was quite an issue using the stuff. It was a bit of a gamble what brand you used, what the smell was like, what it was like post-curing afterwards. This stuff has been pretty consistent across the board. It's not super smelly. My printers are all filtered as well. And of course, I handle these prints with latex gloves on just because of not wanting to actually touch the resin, although sometimes it does happen. And you do build up this resin toxins in your system over time. Unfortunately, that is an issue with all of these resins. Again, not specific to SUNLU. So overall, my recommendation is a positive review for this resin, and I'm really happy with the results that I was able to achieve in it. The limitation on it, however, was speed. And it has to be remembered that because this is a stronger tensile material, but with a little bit more rubbery quality to it because of that, because there's always a trade-off, okay? Everything is a compromise, and the compromise in having additional strength is that has a little bit more stretch. That means that when we are pulling parts off the build plate or off the FEP, the FEP, the clear sheet in the bottom of your printer with the build plate, when we're doing that initial rise, we are slightly stretching those supports, and there is a pressure in there that has to break the seal, and that particular pressure is a lot, especially when you're printing large miniatures. And I was able to take this all the way up to printing tanks. I did print a Medusa, one of my own designs, in this particular resin, but I mostly focused on printing infantry. I'll also show off a Blood Angel just to give you an idea of what happens at the 0.03mm layer height on a 4K Hellite 1 Plus. And that'll give you some idea of the quality of the actual prints that you can achieve. Anyway, overall, very happy with it. The material performed excellently, and I would recommend it, especially at that price point. It is much cheaper than my typical go-to resin, and in fact, it's only about a little less than, well, a little more, I should say, than half the price. So yeah, pretty good. And yeah, so that's SUNLU, and these bottles were sent to me for review purposes. I will freely admit that, by the way. Of course, that doesn't mean that they get a favourable review. As I said, there were some issues with it, namely I could not achieve the maximum speed in the machine. But overall, that's a very minor detraction, I think, from what the actual materials were able to achieve. And like I said, I was very happy with it. And in fact, I'm tempted to buy some more. So I think that's probably the biggest glowing recommendation I can give. And that means that we now bring the amount of resins that I have looked into to about 7. And I will start to do more resin reviews in future. If people do want to send me their resins to try out, I'm happy to do that. But as always, the caveat is, I make the review how I want, and to the person who sends me the resin, you get the review that I make, regardless of whether or not you like it. Anyway, that's it from me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all on the next video.